So over the past several weeks, we have been working through a series of sermons related to our 4PB ministry that we're going to be doing in our community during the week of October 6th through 12th. And all of this is designed to get our heads and our hearts in the best place possible so that we can be the most effective in loving our community in a way that we hope that Jesus would want us to love them. And with today's message, I'm giving it the title, Kindness 101. This is a pretty basic sermon, but I want to really start the sermon with a quote that's not real basic types of stuff. Let me just say first that this quote is not by this guy. This quote is about this guy. And it says this: the signature of the people of God is when they begin to love people whom they would not normally be able to love on their own. Does that make sense? This is a real dude, Anthony Lafredo. He wants to call himself the black alien. And so he has done some body modification, obviously, cut his nose off, his ears, tatted himself up to try to make himself look like an alien. And I would say to you that the real evidence that God is at work in my heart, your heart, is going to be reflected in our ability to love people like Anthony. Think about that. This is the way Jesus put it in his teachings. In Luke chapter 6, starting with verse 32, he said, "If you only love those who love you, whoop-dee-doo." If you only love those who love you, why should you get credit for that? What's the big deal? He said, even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good only to those who do good to you, why should you get any credit for that? Whoop-dee-doo again. Even sinners do that much. And if you lend money only to those who can repay you, why should you think you're so special? Wish you get any credit. Even sinners will lend to other sinners for a full return. And then the next verse, verse 35, is kind of the climax punch of this teaching. He said, love your enemies. And maybe another way of putting it is love those who are difficult to love. Love your enemies. Do good to them. Lend to them without expecting to be repaid. Then, he says, your reward from heaven will be very great. And I want to really zero in on this next clause. And you will truly be acting as children of the Most High. Now think about what Jesus is saying. Who are the children of God? That's what he's labeling here. Who are the children of God? Are you a child of God just because you go to church? No. Are you a child of God just because you give money every now and then? No. Are you a child of God because you have a certain spiritual gift? No. You will truly be acting as a child of God when you do this, when you love your enemies, when you love those who are difficult to love. And then he says, why? Because he is kind. God is kind. He is kind to those who are unthankful and even wicked. In another place, he says he sends the rain on both the righteous and the unrighteous. God blesses all kinds of people. And he says, Jesus said, this is the signature of God's people. This is the highest proof that the Spirit of God is alive in people. That's tough. I came across an interesting story the other day about actually an Israeli soldier. He was in a hospital in Jerusalem. And he was dying. He was actually dying. Now, he wasn't in the hospital because of some courageous act that he had done to save somebody's life that actually almost took his life and would eventually kill him. No. He was in the hospital because he was so sexually promiscuous with both men and women that he had contracted AIDS and he was dying. This was several years ago. He was dying of AIDS. His father was a prominent rabbi in Jerusalem. And there's a sense in which his lifestyle, the way he had been living, was an embarrassment to his family. And at that time, in the early 2000s when this story took place, he was an embarrassment to a lot of people. In fact, the hospital staff didn't want to treat him. The doctors didn't want to go in and help him. Nurses didn't want to bring things to him. He was dying. It's like his lifestyle had become a pariah, in the whole community. Well, one day he had a heart attack, and he was hooked up to certain machines, so the bells and whistles were going off. Something's happening. He's at a crisis, and nobody wanted to go into his room to help him. Well, it just so happened, according to the story, there was a Palestinian Christian janitor. And by the way, this Palestinian lived in a section of the West Bank. It's where he came from, where his family was from, where this guy had been a soldier. He was kind of famous for his brutality to Palestinians at the checkpoints, This guy knew his story. He knew his past. But when he heard those buzzers and whistles going off, that he was having a cardiac event and nobody was going into the room, it says in the story that his heart was filled with compassion. And he, again, this Palestinian Christian, an enemy to this guy, went into his room and began to try to apply CPR. The signature, the sign that you are a child of God, you are one of God's people, is when you begin to love people whom you would not normally be able to love on your own. People that are different, people that are hard. Think about that. Today I want to use a word. There's a word that I want to bring alongside of this message that I think illustrates this message. It's a word that I think is an important biblical word. It's the word hospitality. In fact, the word appears several times in the Bible. And normally when we think about hospitality, we think about having our friends over for meals, being hospitable to our guests in our home. And that is one version or one layer, one segment of the meaning of the word. But I've found it fascinating that the Greek word that is translated hospitality in English is the word philos-xenos. And it literally means loves strangers. The word xenos appears 14 times in the New Testament. 13 of the times it is literally translated strange or stranger. It's a reference to a foreigner, somebody who's different, somebody who comes from another place, And so hospitality at its very root, at its very basic meaning, is a reference to loving people who are different from us. People who you ain't from around here, that sort of an idea. In fact, here's one of those usages of the word hospitality in the New Testament. In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2, it says, "Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers. For thereby," in other words, by doing this, "some have entertained angels unawares." This verse is hearkening back to the Old Testament. Numerous stories, several stories, when strangers would come into town, foreigners would come into town, and the people would serve them, they would feed them a meal, they would take them into their home for the night, whatever it might be, they would show hospitality to them. And during the encounter would learn, hey, these are not just ordinary people, these were actually angels. And so the writer of Hebrews harkens back to those Old Testament stories and says, look, when you come across people that seem different to you, that they're from, not familiar to you, or maybe have different beliefs than you, come from different backgrounds than you, he said, I want you to show love strangers, show hospitality to those people, because sometimes you might be serving an angel, So hospitality is a many-layered, many-splendored word, if you want to put it that way. You know, there's inviting your friends over for a meal. That may be one expression of it. But I want you to see something deeper to this word. To be a Christian is to be hospitable. To be hospitable is to learn how to love people, even strangers, even people who are different from us. And today with this message is kindness 101. I want to show you some layers, what I would think would be layers of hospitality that we can express as Christians in this world. And the first layer, again, very basic layer, has to do with our countenance. You know, it has to do with our face. It has to do with the look on our face, the way we smile at people, the way we approach people with a warmth on our face. One of the most basic ways to show love to strangers is how you look at them. How you look at them. And I know as I say this, there are some of you that are kind of feeling uncomfortable with this because maybe you don't smile a whole lot, you know? And there's some of you maybe need to smile a little bit more. Some of you maybe are listening to this, and if you're going to be honest, you're kind of downright sour. You're a sour kind of person. And look, I understand. I know that all of us have ugly resting faces. You know what a resting face? Here's my resting face. A resting face isn't very attractive, okay? I'll admit it. We all have ugly resting faces. But we need to learn how to smile a little bit more, okay? I mean, well, I don't feel like smiling. I understand that. Sometimes I don't feel like smiling either. But I want to say to you on a very basic level, one of the first ways that we can show love to strangers is by how we facially greet them. Before we even say a word, how we facially greet them. Let me show you a couple of proverbs that I think are interesting that talk about your look. Okay? And they're both from Proverbs chapter 15, verse 13 and verse 30. Proverbs 15:13 says, "A happy heart makes the face cheerful." Okay? And this one says, "A cheerful look brings joy to the heart." Now I think both of these are talking about the look on your face, but they're talking about them from different perspectives. They both look at the look. They both describe a look, but the first one says, the status of your heart will many times be reflected in your face. In other words, a happy heart makes a cheerful face. If your heart's in a good place, it makes it easier to smile. You know, it'll be more natural to smile. And then this one says, a cheerful look brings joy to the heart. Whose heart? A cheerful look on my face will bring joy to other people's hearts, you know. So the look on your face reflects the status of your heart, and it can influence the heart of others. Now, I could say to you right now, I could say, well, look at the person in the room there next to you and give them a smile. And you know, if I ask you to do that and you did it, it would probably be fake. You know what I mean? We'll give them a fake smile. I don't want you to do that. I'm not going to ask you to do that, but I am going to ask you to begin to pray about your look. I want you to pray about your countenance. I want you to pray about, God, is there something wrong with my heart? Is there something wrong with the way I look at people and the way I greet people and the way I see people and the way I meet people? Because the first layer of hospitality, the first layer of loving strangers is how we look at them. Okay. Now, a second layer that I think is just maybe a step above this, it has to do with courtesy. It has to do with manners. You know, it's letting other people go before you. When you go into a public building and it doesn't have an automatic door, do you ever just hold the door for the next person coming behind you? Or are you just one of those that goes in, I don't care. Let the door slam in their face. I don't care. No. A second way that you can love strangers on a very basic level, this is kindness 101, is with courtesy, with manners. You've got your shopping cart at Walmart, at Kroger, and it's loaded with groceries, and you're headed to the checkout counter. And you get there at the same time as somebody else. To love a stranger, to let them go first. You're driving your car down Westwood Boulevard here in Poplar Bluff, and on the right, you're going south, and on the right, there's Starbucks, and next to it's Goodwill. That's the next building you come across. And then the next one is KFC. And the next one is Burger King and Popeyes, that little place where they come out. And so there's a stoplight in front of you, and the stoplight's red, and traffic's starting to back up, and you're in the lane, kind of almost right there in front of Burger King or KFC, and somebody's trying to come out. Do you ever just let them out? or do you one of these things? You just look straight ahead and try to act like you don't even see them over there. You just, I'm so focused on the stoplight, I can't. No, you can see those people. You just don't want to let them in. A second layer of loving strangers is simply with acts of courtesy. Can you ever let other people go ahead of you? Can you ever give way and let somebody else go in your place? Jesus said in Luke chapter 6, verse 31, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You treat other people the way you want to be treated. This is the golden rule, and the golden rule is all about manners. It's how you treat people, Kindness 101 from Titus 3:2 is to speak evil of no one, to avoid quarreling, to be gentle, and to show perfect courtesy toward all people. You let them go first. Again, this is low level. This is basic. This is kindness 101. This is the most basic layers of loving strangers. It's with your face. It's how you look at them. It's the courtesy that you show them. And maybe give you a third one real quickly is how you contribute to them as well. How you contribute to the real and specific needs of people. A third way to love strangers is to do something for them, to bless them, to help them, to encourage them by doing something for them when they have a real and specific need. Last week, Sloan shared about the story in the Bible of the Good Samaritan, Jesus' great teaching on the Good Samaritan. And the Good Samaritan is all about contributing to a specific need of somebody who's different from you, a stranger, the Samaritan comes upon this man. He's been beaten and he's been stripped, robbed, and left to die on the side of the road. And he didn't have a first aid kit. How's he going to wrap his wounds with bandages? He used his own clothing. He used his own oil. He puts this man on his animal and he walks beside the animal. He's sacrificing left and right. He goes to an inn and stays with him, interrupts his schedule. He does all of this for that man. A third way that you can love strangers is by contributing to their specific needs. I've always loved this great teaching by Jesus. It comes from a parable in Matthew chapter 25 where Jesus said, I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger. There's that word xenos, one of the 14 times it occurs in the New Testament. I was a stranger and you invited me into your home. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you cared for me. I was in prison and you visited me. And what I love about this parable is how Jesus twists this around, and he said, they say, well, when did we ever see you and do these things? And he said, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me. And so I think that what I want to encourage people in our church as they are preparing for this 4PB ministry, I want them to think, every time you're getting ready to do something for somebody, don't think you're doing it for them. Realize you're doing it for Jesus. That's Jesus. That's Jesus. Do it for him. Let that be your motivation. I think this is a powerful teaching to help us in preparing our hearts for what we're going to do in service. Let's go back to Hebrews chapter 13. I want to look at the first 3 verses in this chapter. I think this is really good. The writer says, keep on loving each other as brothers and sisters. So he's talking about the church community. I want you to love each other. And then he says, don't forget to show hospitality to strangers. Don't forget to love the strangers around you. For some who have done this have entertained angels without realizing it. So Jesus said, when you serve, think that you're doing it to me. The writer of Hebrews says, when you serve strangers, sometimes you might be doing it to an angel, But I want to zero in on verse 3. He says, remember those in prison. And I want you to notice these 2 clauses that I've highlighted. Remember those in prison as if you were there yourself. Remember also those being mistreated as if you felt their pain in your own bodies. Now here's what's going on in this verse. There's something really important that the writer is wanting us to see. He says that the root or the origins of sympathy are found in our imagination. In other words, if I can begin to imagine what it would be like to be in prison, what if I were in prison? How would I want to be treated? If I can imagine myself, I will feel sympathy towards those who are there. Remember those who are being mistreated as if you felt their pain in your own bodies. Do you see the point? Imagination is the crucible within which you can see sympathy begin to grow and begin to take shape. You see that person and they're begging, or you see that person and they're suffering or struggling. You see that person and you try to think, well, what if that was me? What if that was my life? And the point that it's making here is that when you can begin to imagine yourself in that situation, it begins to change your heart and you look at things and people and situations differently. I think the problem that we have is that a lot of us are afflicted with a disease, EDD. You're familiar with ADD or ADHD, but many of us are afflicted with EDD, empathy deficit disorder. The problem with a lot of us is that we don't ever put ourselves in our minds in their situation, and we just don't feel it, and we just don't care. God help us with this deficiency, to get rid of this deficiency. Because when you can begin to see that person, it changes you. I read this story the other day about this guy that he was, every morning he was awakened by this bird, this northern mockingbird that was in the tree just outside his bedroom window. And that bird was so loud, made so much noise. He had to have quiet to sleep. And the bird was so annoying. He's, where's my gun? I want to shoot that bird. And he went outside. His wife got him the gun. He went out and he tried to shoot the bird. He couldn't get it. He wasn't that good of a shot, but he wanted to get rid of that bird. And for a couple of days, he would go out and try to shoot, couldn't get the bird. He said, I need to understand this bird a little bit better. And so he started reading up maybe what their patterns, what they thought like, what they liked and didn't like. Maybe that'll make it easier for me to shoot him and get him. And so as he read about this northern mockingbird, he began to learn. For example, the male mockingbird has as many as 200 different sounds that it makes out of its repertoire. Think about that. He thought, well, that's interesting. Males and females build their nests together. Well, that's interesting. It's not just the man's job. The women help in building the nest, building the house. And they may call on other mockingbirds to protect the nest in the event of an attack. Well, they've got a sense of community. They got a little paramilitary group here that they work together. And he was so impressed as he read more and more about the mockingbirds, that he became intrigued. His curiosity was awakened. And as he understood more about the bird, one day he actually said this to his wife, "These birds are incredible. They are fascinating." And the more he read, the more he learned, the less he was bothered, and the more that he was genuinely interested in these birds. Think about that. And this is the point of Hebrews 13:3. The more that I can put myself in their position, the more that I can try to understand where they've come from, the more love it will give me for them. The more that I will be sympathetic toward their situation. The more that I will be maybe even less judgmental about them. You know what I mean? I will care for them in ways that they deserve to be or need to be cared for, because I'm feeling what their life is actually like. The word sympathy comes from two Greek words stuck together, pulled together, sum pathos. And literally, to have sympathy is to suffer with, to imagine what their suffering is like. And this is what God is calling us to understand, to begin to imagine and then sympathize with the needs of others. It motivates us to love them the way they should be loved. The thing that's fascinating to me about our Savior Jesus is that the Bible says he was tempted in all ways as we are. We don't have a high priest who cannot sympathize with us. He understands what it's like to be one of us. He loves us and he understands us, and he's given his life for us. His understanding and his love made his sacrifice a more beautiful thing. And he said, "That's the way I want you to live out your life." Maybe today you are afflicted with EDD. God, help me with that. Maybe you're afflicted with a shriveled heart. God, help me with that. Jesus, today I pray that you'll take this very basic message about kindness 101 and use it to remind us of the kind of lives that you want us to live for you, that reflects your nature and character and makes a difference in our world. In Jesus'